You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we'll be thinking about the names that we give characters by looking at a wide variety of media. Stories, religions, and mythologies have riffed on the idea that names are imbued with special significance since early times. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Isis earned her son Horus the throne by tricking Ra into revealing his true name. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus vaunts his name to Polyphemus, which results in the wrath of Poseidon being called down upon him. People of the Jewish faith, particularly in ancient times, avoid speaking God's name in almost any form, but especially avoid using his so-called true name, Yahweh, so as to avoid taking the name in vain and breaking the third commandment. It's no surprise then that this idea has survived into modern media. From Lord of the Rings to Death Note, names are known to have great power. But names aren't just powerful in fiction. In the real world, there have been a slew of research papers which suggest that your name affects your job prospects, your educational success, what kind of car you're more likely to buy, where you're more likely to live, who you're more likely to marry, and so on and so on. Now, the validity of each of these claims is up for debate, but it's undoubtedly true that certain names hold a variety of associations that alter how we perceive someone with said name. Sheldon sounds nerdy, Reginald sounds posh, and Ziggy sounds zany. Of course, none of these statements need be true, they're just assumptions. But assumptions are a huge part of how we judge people. Characters in stories are no different. The name of a character is how we identify that character, particularly so in books and scripts. These identifiers carry with them years of cultural baggage, both from real-world sources and the plethora of stories that preceded them. As such, the name a creator gives to their character is of vital importance, as it shapes the audience's perception of that character right from the word go. The question that every creator must ask themselves is simple in form: what name suits this character? However, the sheer multitude of approaches someone can take to answering that question can feel overwhelming, often to the point of paralyzing the author. Today we're going to look at what names can tell us about someone by drawing on examples from famous works. That way we might better utilize these ingrained associations of names when creating our own characters. The most basic associations of a name have to do with how they look and sound. Take these two words, Maluma and Tekete. Now look at these shapes. Which shape would you name Maluma and which would you name Tekete? If you're like the significant majority of people, you will have named this shape Tekete and this shape Maluma. This is a famous psychological phenomenon known as the Maluma-Tekete effect, or sometimes as the Boba-Kiki effect. The effect has even been found in infants who have yet to learn a language. There's something inherently sharp or pointed about the word Tekete compared to the round or curved nature of the word Maluma. Undoubtedly, we can see this effect with any word or name. Names like Bob and Lou lay closer to the Maluma example, and might make us think of a person with rounder features, a softer demeanor, or shorter stature. On the other hand, names like Kevin or Tina might make us envision someone with sharper features, a rougher demeanor, or taller stature. Even if your audience has no prior association with the name you pick for your character, just the feel of the name can instantly shape how that character is perceived. Another important technique for choosing the look and sound of names is contrast. As mentioned in my episode about formatting dialogue, you don't want too much overlap in the look and sound of the names of your main cast. Visual or oral overlap makes it hard for your viewer to quickly distinguish which character is being referred to, tripping them up and pulling them out of the story. Names are so much more than just their constituent sounds and letters though. There is a crazy amount of information that we can derive about a character from their name alone. For starters, names are, traditionally, a strong signifier of gender. I'll reel off 7 names and you tell me if they're male or female. Jennifer, John, Dylan, Chris, Mabel, Lily, Stan. Now my guess is that practically everyone agrees on these 6 names, but Chris could be contentious. Now I would assume that someone called Chris is a guy, being short for Christopher, but there are also girls called Chris, being short for Christine. However, I would also assume that a girl who prefers to be called Chris rather than Christine is more tomboyish. Similarly, if I heard of a guy called Ariel, I would assume him to be more feminine in nature, but of course that's only because of The Little Mermaid. So now we're not only getting an insight into the character's gender, but also potentially the masculinity or femininity of their personality. A name can also tell us where someone is from. Joseph is most likely from an English-speaking country, Abdul is most likely from an Arabic-speaking country, and Jean-Pierre is most likely from a French-speaking country. I say most likely because of course the person may be the child of immigrants who prefer to choose names based on their own customs. But even in this case, the name is still telling us something about the character's origins. A character's last name in particular can really narrow down the field to a specific country. Nakamura or Tanaka are undoubtedly Japanese, while Bianchi or Russo are definitely Italian. Certain naming conventions are so specific that they can separate out even very similar ancestries. For example, both Bulgarian and Russian names frequently use the suffixes of and over. Both also take their second name from the name of their father and their last name from the name of their grandfather. However, in Bulgaria, both the second and last names end with of or over, whereas in Russia, the second name instead uses Ovich or Ovna. Therefore, a Bulgarian man with the name Georgy Ivanov Petrov had a father called Ivan and a grandfather called Peter. But if this same man was Russian, his name would instead be Georgy Ivanovich Petrov. If you were raised in that part of the world, you could distinguish between a Russian and a Bulgarian based on this convention alone. All of that may sound wildly convoluted, but the key takeaway is this: there are many ways a name can suggest someone's specific culture. Of course, that brings us to another piece of information that someone's name conveys: blood relation. Family names exist in most places, and these names tell us if two people are related. Taken together with the characters' ages, we can also infer the nature of their relation. If we have two women who share the same last name, but they're 30 years apart in age, they're far more likely to be mother and daughter than they are to be sisters. Similarly, we can learn a lot about people's marriages based on names. Did the wife take the husband's last name? Maybe their child has taken both of their last names in a hyphenated form. Not only does a hyphenated last name tell us both their father's last name and their mother's maiden name, it could also tell us the time period this character was born in. If their parents were married in the late 20th or 21st century and decided to hyphenate their names, it could be their way of acknowledging gender equality. In the 18th and 19th centuries, however, these hyphenated names, called double-barreled names, were typically created to preserve a prestigious family name that might otherwise be lost through marriage. That's why in Western culture, we typically think of people with more last names as being more posh, such as Gilbert Heathcote-Drummond-Willoughby, who had a triple-barreled name. Of course, all the examples I've covered so far relate to the real world, but so much of fiction takes place in alternate worlds or alternate histories, in which naming conventions can be completely skewed. In these cases, a name may simply tell us what a character is. Bolt and Lassie are most likely dogs, Diablo and Bogul are most likely demons, and Ugluk and Garrosh are most likely orcs. Typically, fictionalized races will have their own set of naming conventions which have been dreamt up by the author, and this makes the world feel more cohesive and believable. Droids in the Star Wars universe all have short names that read like numerical and alphabetical codes: C-3PO, R2-D2, and BB-8 for example. Also note here that BB-8 follows the Maluma Tekete way of thinking, where his name is round just like his shape. Lovecraftian deities all sound like demons, but with a unique, unpronounceable quality to their name which alludes to their incomprehensible nature. The names Shaturga, Xelatath, and Ulioth from Eternal Darkness all look and sound strange. We can play with this idea to blend expectations based on naming conventions. For example, if we want a robot that expresses emotions, we might use a name that is both robot-sounding and human-sounding. WALL-E is an acronym for Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth Class, but of course it also sounds like the human name Wally. Similar trends occur for Eva and Otto. Resident Evil uses this technique for the different zombie types, combining the naming convention of military weapons with mythological creatures to create a consistent set of bioweapon names like Cerberus, Titan, and Chimera. One trend that crosses both fiction and non-fiction is the use of titles. Titles are combined with names to tell us someone's job and rank. King Robert, Captain Haddock, Father Ted, Lieutenant Surge, Mayor Quimby, Sir Lancelot, Baron Munchausen, etc., etc. If you want to convey someone's status and abilities in a very short amount of time, titles are a fantastic way of doing just that. We've looked at second names, last names, and titles, but what about characters known only by a single name? This typically indicates the character is incredibly important to the story and well known. Superheroes are some of the best examples of this: Superman, Flash, Hulk, but of course there are heaps of characters known by only a single name. Yoda, Dracula, Tintin, Voldemort, Terminator, Leatherface, and so on. There are many reasons a character may have only one name. Their first or last names are dropped for simplicity's sake, they have a real name but are known by a pseudonym, or they were literally only given one name. Only being given one name is an incredibly common practice in ancient mythology, where the cultural customs of the time only called for one name. That includes the Greeks with Heracles and Achilles, the Norsemen with Thor and Loki, and the Egyptians with Horus and Imhotep. Of course, many people in the Bible only had a single name as well, including the most famous example, Jesus. His last name isn't actually Christ, Christ is a title. Due in part to the prevalence of single-named icons in ancient mythology, many modern stories also use a single name for their major heroes and villains. Going back to the example of superheroes, the names I listed earlier are of course just their superhero identities. Each of them has a secret, true identity: Clark Kent, Barry Allen, and Bruce Banner. But giving them their one-word pseudonym acts as an easy handle for the audience, whilst also boosting their reputation as heroes. This technique is also adopted by many celebrities in the real world, such as Cher, Teller, Sting, Madonna, Moby, and Liberace. These names allow the celebrity to take on an alternate larger-than-life persona. One common practice in modern Western storytelling seems to work against this theory, using the name John, or its variation Jack, for main characters. On the surface, you might think that John or Jack are incredibly plain names and wouldn't help a protagonist to stand out. However, this trope can be used for various effects. Firstly, because the audience is tuned to see John as a masculine, everyman type of name, it allows the writer to quickly establish a baseline personality for their protagonist. Think John McClane, Jack Bauer, Jack Reacher, John Spartan, John Matrix, Jack Shepard, John Connor, or John Wick. Of course, this idea is parodied by Schwarzenegger himself, the typical action hero, with his character John Kimble in Kindergarten Cop. John can also be such a plain first name that the second name instead stands out, allowing for the audience to learn the character by their second, more iconic name. John Hancock, John Watson, John Constantine, John Shaft, John Frank, John Munch, John Locke, and John Rambo. A similar usage to this is when the character has such a regular name that they're instead known by a pseudonym, like with John Hannibal Smith or John Jigsaw Kramer. So far, we've seen that names have a variety of uses. Names can set someone out from the crowd, making them unique or iconic. Names can pay homage to familial bonds. Names can act as shorthand for someone's personality. But ultimately, a name spoken by its owner is weak. Names become powerful because others give them meaning. The names that pass into legend do so by being repeated by others, whether that's a person or a character. In the second part of this episode, we'll look at the way characters use each other's names and how this can alter our perception of their relationship and personal traits. Good writing and good luck.